Hello. It's crazy to start this. Every time I record to do this podcast, I'm surprised I'm still doing this podcast. Like, it's not that I don't want to do it, but it's work. Like, it's weird. Like, it's work to sit down, put the mic on, record, do anything with it when you have your everyday life that you're going through. But part of doing things positive for yourself mentally in any way is to act, and I think that's what we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, my name is Omar Green. I'm LCSW. I'm up to the LCSW podcast, and today we're talking about empowerment and getting involved, and how a sense of control can help people that feel better about themselves when they're facing overwhelming odds, when they're facing any type of challenge in life that will be there. And how, honestly, even in the reverse, how our moods sometimes are symptomology, whether they're feeling depressed or insecure, sometimes limits our ability to be involved. And when I mean involved, I mean at all levels. So it could be politically, whether you're into local town council, or whether you're into gubernatorial, or stuff at the local level, or stuff at the state level, stuff at the federal level, just some type of political involvement that makes you a part of a big community. And I think about that. I think about how even Erickson says that, like, at some point, we get to a point in life where it's less about us doing for ourselves. We sort of at some point reach the okay point of what we've accomplished for ourselves, and it's more about what we do for others. And even one of the articles I was reading in preparation for that talked about that. It talked about how social capital is the biggest thing. Having access to a community, having friends, having a sense of trust that you build through helping others and doing others, and how that sometimes is more important than just personal finance and how much money you make and being solvent. I mean, not that doesn't matter, but once that reaches a certain threshold, it becomes more about your community and your relationships, and how you express those relationships, and how those relationships grow. So it could be on that level. It could be in your job, whether that means you're climbing the social ladder, whether that means you're advocating, even if you don't have a executive or a managerial type position. It could be just the fact that you're out there continuing to advocate for better treatment, whether it's better treatment based on a sense of race, gender, just workers' rights in general. It could be any of those. So even that is a way to be empowered. Because I think, especially with this past election, the past 2020 election, we had Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. I think a lot of people were really pushed to be involved because of how high the stakes were, because of some of the actions that showed that people were sort of losing control of basic sense of stability. And it inspired a lot of people to get involved. And you saw things that were amazing in the face of sort of this dark 4 years of Trump. And yes, if I'm ever talking about political, I'm gonna unashamedly say, that I'm progressive and a liberal. You saw a lot of women of color be involved and win at local levels and at state levels and at federal levels. You saw women of color. You've seen men of color progress. And you see more and more people running and getting involved. You see the formations of groups like Justice Democrats that are purposely looking for regular people that want to be involved and want to make a change. And so you're seeing more and more people getting involved. You see the Black Lives Matter movement take off from something that was a Facebook message to now, having corporate sponsorship and getting more notoriety and being normalized in the everyday dialogue. And so empowerment is become huge over the past 4 years, and it's always been something huge. I think that it shows itself in certain disorders, in terms of like people who have eating disorders. For some people, it could be sent to like as a sense of control, of wanting to have control over eating. So that's sort of that in a negative way. The same thing for people who are self-interest. They want to have a sense of control. And so when you do empowerment activities that are positive and not negative, it can possibly replace those negative ways of coping to give people a sense of control, that their actions, their things that they do, their entire being matters and has a place in this world, and they don't have to exact it out on themselves. They don't have to exact it out on others. But when people feel a sense of helplessness and a loss of control, that's almost the definition of a crisis, right? When you have these sort of barriers that overwhelm you and you feel like you're unprepared, you feel like you just can't do it, you feel like you're not able to overcome or manage or survive the challenges that are facing you. And so in those similar senses, for years, a lot of people just feel like they don't have a part to play, and their part to play is not going to really matter on the actual outcome either way. And that can be, and I've heard it, I've been there, where I've seen things happen in a workplace that were wrong, and wanted to advocate for policies for better worker treatment. And I've had coworkers tell me that nothing's going to change. And they express doubt and apathy as they kind of just take it. They kind of just endure bad treatment, and they sort of push down the hurt instead of feeling empowered to advocate and to be honest and to be resilient in maintaining their integrity. I've seen it in voting, where some people just don't vote. They don't believe that doesn't believe that it will be that it will ever change, because they see their situation just not getting better regardless. And so sense of like empowerment and giving someone the ability to do something themselves is huge. It can even, the study I have, or a study I mainly relied on to prepare for this podcast, talked about political involvement and involvement in the workplace. And so, I said before, that could be voting, that could be that it could be even getting up to the corporate ladder. So therefore, you can make decisions better than maybe your predecessor could. But it could be anything. It could be just having a job and just being able to accomplish that. When I talk to patients about pleasant activities and hobbies and things of that nature, entering different communities, it's about having a sense of accomplishment. Part of it is just enjoying, right? It could be something you like for fun and something that you just like to do. But part of it also is just the fact that you can actually enjoy what you're doing. You can actually gain some enjoyment by knowing that you're a skilled person and that you actually can have control in some way over what you're doing. I think, in a lot of ways, empowerment is a huge, huge thing. And I know that I've got involved. I voted. Honestly, ever since the past, I would say 8 years, but really even 4 to 2 years, I've become more involved in looking at politics and not just taking things readily. As I've learned that some people can have bad intentions when they broadcast news, and they can say things that are, misleading, if not just false. And they can lead you to sort of vote or support people that are not in your best interest. So I feel that, this is a huge topic, and this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to do this last month, but I'm still getting used to these once a month podcasts, and when I really get into this, I'm gonna try to get to maybe twice a month. Double up and try to do that. But yeah, the article that I have here did focus on all of those things, and it was really good to see, because there was another article I wrote that kind of talked about how it's one continuous behavior, which I believe that as well, where it talked about how depression really has a huge factor into people just feeling apathetic and not wanting to be involved. And when you don't feel hopeful, you can internalize at times. You can't think like things are your fault, and you have a sense of guilt, and you can doubt your own ability to affect change. So this section, this study, talked about the things we sort of mentioned about was one of the things was volunteering, and I'm gonna add something to there as I kind of think about volunteering. I think about just sort of doing something that you don't get paid for, but you get something out of. And that could be even doing something that you pay for as a person. A lot of time, not a lot of times, but sometimes I've sent some of my patients to improv class or other, I suggested to go to other class. And that's them volunteering their time, them taking the time and effort to do this. Heck, like I'm doing right now. And that's empowering, because that shows that you have control over something to do something. And so I think, when they talk about sort of volunteering, that's a huge thing, is to have control over how you choose your time and what you choose to do with that time. Because I think there's been a lot of injustice and a lot of discrimination based on race that's limited people's opportunity to do anything. And after a while, it almost becomes normalized that certain things just aren't for you, and your choices get narrowed, and the world just seems a little smaller. And you see these few people do it, you see these celebrities and people do these things, but they seem far away. And when you're volunteering your time to do something different, and to empower yourself by doing something that advocates for you, the betterment of you and your community, in any way, whether it could be volunteering at a food shelter, it could be trying to be a better person in terms of communication, it could be being a vote counter. That's you being able to have the freedom and expressing that freedom to go places where historically people based on either race or gender or other factors were just not giving the opportunity. One thing that is hard about that is connecting enjoyment to being paid. And for some people, that's hard to think about. Right? They think about just the instant gratification, and they think about how if they're putting service in, that they don't receive something back, that it's going to be difficult. And I think that in this study, it talks about that, right? It talks about how people sort of have this way to sustain that. And it could be, honestly, for other reasons. It could be other reasons in terms of having difficulty sustaining volunteering. But I think of that as one, to possibly, to get over that. There's other forms of gratification other than just instant gratification. And working towards something, even if you don't see it for a long time, is worth it. To come back to the thing about people being normalized as they're sort of locked out of certain societies and rooms and associations or groups of people, when it comes to doing stuff in the work realm, a lot of persons don't even know some of the things they have. They don't know their rights. They don't know the things they can do. They don't know. They're not told, or it's not made explicit to them. They're discouraged. And even when they ask, sometimes they will get attitude. They will get some type of negative feedback from employers about them trying to empower themselves. And so when I think about empowerment, it's not as easy. We can talk about these things and learn about these things, but there is a space where there might be a barrier, and a barrier could be honestly someone pushing back. Because in terms of they not wanting you to be empowered, because it benefits them for you not to get the best of what you deserve as a person. So in the next couple of sections, I'm definitely going to be talking about the results of this thing that came, this research article that I read in connection to this, and talking about how to maybe get around those articles, to advocate using agency, to use multiple sources, to triangulate and make sure the facts are correct. Because, if we don't, that's my time, if we don't empower ourselves, who else is going to do that? All right, let's get to the next part. Hello. This is the second part of the podcast, and to talk about sometimes the dirty part of podcasting in terms of like audio and quality, since like this is a one-man show. Before I get into the second part of what we're talking about, last podcast I realized that I sounded like super low. I was like way across the other side of the room. So I'm gonna be trying something. I'm using 3 different mics. I used one mic for the first part. I'm using this mic second part. And honestly, I think I might even use a third mic for the third part. And I'm gonna jump all over the place and listen to it. To all people who are not subscribed, totally tell me how this sounds. But we were starting to talk about empowerment. And we were starting to talk about how people feel empowered when they get politically involved. And I read this research article that was so good when it came to this. And we talked about how it talked about like sort of whether people are involved because they are doing stuff at their job, and the psychological benefits of that, whether they're getting involved, in the political process, and they're getting involved. And as I did that, I started to remember some experiences that I did from therapeutic stuff. One thing I talked about was sort of family medical leave, and I remember as a therapist how as simple as that is, it's sort of overlooked because I remember telling people about this, and some people did not know it was a thing. They didn't know that you could, if you felt overstressed, that you could, due to work and physical conditions, that you could leave, that you could, and not have your employer sort of pressure you in any one way to do something. And so, they were, so the people I told that were encouraged and empowered and were able to use those resources to get better results in terms of their desires to sort of take a break away from work as they dealt with whatever health they needed. And at times, those things can have huge impact because there's a lot of populations of people that feel that they're always under the gun, and feel that they're always under scrutiny, or some really huge sense of doubt, or something that says that they're not credible, or they're not a good worker, or they're not a good person, and that they're just waiting for some screw up to sort of confirm that. Usually people of color are black, and as we talked about sort of empowerment, and we kind of highlighted, race. This research does sort of confirm that, right? And it says that sort of on a regular basis that black people are less consistent and volunteering politically, and participation. And so, even though they do say that being involved does lead to social change, so sometimes there's doubt and sometimes there's fear of retaliation. But it's hard to say this with 100% straight face, because to say that there's no way that people can retaliate but make it look like it's not retaliation is just false. There are times where people have retaliate. I've been a victim of, on some level that I'll never truly know because I didn't go into it, social politics, where people targeted me on a professional level and made up rumors and said things and whatnot, but I can never truly prove, with concrete evidence it was this person or that person. So I've been there, and so there is some retaliation, but there is some precedence that sort of protects people, even if they're whistleblowers, right? Even if they're saying, "Hey, man, this thing is wrong," whether it be misconduct, whether it be sexual harassment, whether it be other things, all for which you have protections for, whether it be wages, anything that's not right in the workplace. There are law or policies against retaliation in the workplace, and I would encourage anyone that wants to know more about that to look up sort of worker rights, worker protection rights, talk to your local Department of Labor, and then advocate for yourself. And so, because it does bear results. Because even when I'm looking at this research here, and I'm going to start learning how to put links in the podcast so you guys can actually verify and do that, because that's something that I like. I like when someone says, "Yo, here's the truth," and go read the article, and it can make it super easy to read the article. So I'm going to live up to that goal today, and I'm going to make sure that I put a link to this main research in there. Because when I even look at the part that talks about sort of fighting back in the workplace, they talk about sort of racism, and they talk about how half of the people they did this survey on fought back against discrimination, and a fifth had some positive outcome, but that fifth wouldn't existed at all unless someone tried, and because of years of racism and workplace discrimination, that's blatant in terms of always favoring white people, or mostly favoring white people, and at times overwhelmingly targeting black people or people of color. There can be a lot of discouragement, as I kind of mentioned last time. Like, I remember, even if I go back to my thing, even though I don't think it had anything to do with race, there was a lot of discouragement from my colleagues of even challenging it, because they just thought that when the high-ups make a decision, they make a decision. And so even when it's not in race, which is not always determinant of, because in my situation, everybody was a minority, there's still those power dynamics that reside between management and people who are not in management. And it's unfortunate because as whether I'm a therapist, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and my job, part of it is empowering people, and part of empowering people is letting them know their rights from an ethical standpoint. And so I'm not magically a different person outside my office from inside my office. I treat people the same. I mean, maybe I'm not talking in a super soft tone, or I'm not as like a more cut to the chase, in a sense. But I treat people the same, and so I would empower coworkers. I would empower if I had a team. I would empower my team. I let them know like, yo, you can do this. This is how you can write me up. This is how you do all that stuff, because that makes it feel like they're on an even playing ground, and you're working with them, and not against them. And so it is something that unfortunately there still is a issue with, and I've tried to be sort of inquisitive, and I've actually pushed myself to consistently question authority, and not in a way that's disrespectful, but in a way that sort of, if I have something that doesn't seem right, to sort of make myself hurt. And honestly, it's to kind of go back to sort of the whole thing of social politics. People sort of, I realized that after the first time you sort of do it and you do it on a regular basis, people sort of get used to it. It's weird. Like, people get used to people's personality traits, and if you're the person that inquisits and slightly challenges, it's no longer as surprising that you inquisit and you slightly challenge. They kind of just say, okay, that's Omar, and they kind of just go along with it, and if they have an answer, they do, and if they don't, they don't, and they kind of go from there. And so I would say to do it, establish that relationship, maintain it, being respectful, but do it consistently. So therefore, you can have a good dialogue with your employer. This other interesting thing, sort of, that they talk about in the article. So we talk about race, and one thing ironically we talk about was education, and it's hard. I don't like to talk about a couple of other studies that I haven't read recently because I can't put it in the link in the bio, but I know I've read other studies that have talked about how education is somewhat of the great equalizer, and we talked about how having colleges is a huge asset. In fact, the neighborhood I want to be in has a law school, middle school, and I think elementary school, if not, or I think it's like maybe a middle school and a high school, all within like a half mile of each other, like all within like a half mile block. Like, it's just like boom, boom, boom. And it's shown that people who are more educated commit crimes less. People who are more educated are more civically involved, and they show that it's that these things are sort of positively correlated with pushing back against discrimination. People who are educated raises their likelihood to be involved, raise their likelihood to have political participation, raise their likelihood to advocate for themselves in the workplace. And so I think those are huge. One thing is, as increasingly, it says marriage increases the chance of volunteering, which increases Black people. That's interesting. I don't know how marriage increases the likelihood of like volunteering, but then decreases the likelihood of receiving discrimination. Maybe if I was to just hypothesize, it's like having someone that is like yourself. So if you are someone that had a hard time perceiving discrimination before, especially in dating culture, where it's perceived like it's taboo to talk about politics. Excuse me. And so if you were to be in a relationship with someone that you don't know their politics, most likely culturally have some of the same things. Because I always found that weird that people don't talk about politics, but politics is literally everything you do. And so if you talk about your beliefs and all that stuff, and what you like and don't like, there's most likely a law, policy, there's something that governs that you can connect to local, state, or federal government. So, and especially in the day and age, after the Trump presidency, when you found out so many people that maybe next to you, they vote for that guy despite knowing his inefficiencies and his lack of competence and his overt sort of emboldenment of sort of racist, violent groups that have shown up as unfortunately, I've seen sort of right-wing terrorism sort of on the rise over the years. It's going to be interesting to see if that's still something that holds. In relationships that lead to marriages, if people aren't checking people politically, even if in a light way, to say, hey, where do you stand on X, Y, Z? But, so therefore, I could see that being that just someone saying, hey, I feel the same way, you feel the same way, and without a challenge, how would they know? Like, how will they know? But as this sort of, I keep reading through this thing, this research here, education is noted again. So, I not to go on a tangent or to jump on a soapbox for my podcast. I can just, say whatever I want. But yeah, please preach education in some way, shape, or form. It's huge in terms of just being overall a good person. And so, I think when I look at these sort of results and think about sort of that, I think for a lot of things in terms of personal life. And it comes back to the point of sort of marriage. I've not talked about my dating life, but have I been out with people that, even if we didn't talk about politics, I can get that from the conversation we are kind of at the opposite ends? Maybe. I think I've heard people sort of say certain things in passing. Like, I remember I was on a date when I lived in Atlanta with this person. And it's ironic. Like, I'm thinking, and I've been growing my hair for the past 3 years with some success, some failure, as I've sort of been stumbling about this whole hair growth process without any complete, simple instructions and whatever. And so it's ironic when I think about this story all those years ago. But I'm in Atlanta. It's 2013. And I'm on a date. And at that time, I had no intention of growing my hair. I was the person that was, raised to just shave your hair off. You're a guy. That's what guys do, especially, coming from Jamaican culture. Anytime you have any hair growth, your instinct, you're trying to be Rasta, when, not necessarily. People mix and match things and from different cultures in terms of styles, even if you don't have that belief. So you could just be someone that wants dreads but still want to have a job. And so I remember I was on a date, and I'm talking to this girl, and I mentioned it, and I'm like, yeah, man, maybe I want to grow dreads. I remember the first thing she said, and it's weird. I've heard so many things on, like, the date or attempted approaches of women, and some of the things that sort of fit away. I don't know why this stuck with me, but I remember she's saying like, well, that might not be good for your job prospects. And I was like, and me thinking like, like trying to be nice. I'm like, yo, it's my hair, dude. Like I do, like, you know what I mean? Like, who are you to worry about my job prospects? But like maybe she was seeing politically, like, if this was to keep going, what would be her, I don't know, her chances of having someone that has financial stability or something? Like, I don't know. But, so I think that's the closest. I think, that's the closest in terms of that. There are some cultural things in terms of like people who are very family oriented, or people who are very outgoing, and I think about that now in terms of people that may need support and could go one way politically. People that and want to sort of establish home and want sort of policies and things in place that makes that easier. I think people who are like more sort of outgoing and entrepreneurial and ambitious, people that maybe don't want to start a business, and or wanted to do some type of a solo venture, and how that may influence it. So I think, I pull from those, and there's more stuff to look into before at the last part of this podcast. I think about how, that the marriage line, reducing the probability of perceiving discrimination is interesting, because sometimes you do get wrapped up in your own world and it's hard to see out of it. And even, I'm in a relationship now, and she's the only listener, so hi. Like, I try to cut that balance well between being, with her, but then also making sure the other people in my life, whether it's the friends I knew before her or my family, I try to keep some contact. And the pandemic of 2020 into 2021 has made that a lot harder. But I think the answer to that, and I guess I am saying I'm trying to provide an answer because of the fact that I do think it's a bad thing that we don't prescribe discrimination, because discrimination has been way undersold in general, and especially here in America when it comes to our black people and then to also people of color, is to expose yourself to other people. You know what I mean? Like, and not mean like cheating or anything like that. Just have friends. Talk to your family. Go out with your friends without the person you're with. You know what I mean? And expose yourself to other people, so therefore you can see other points of view and perspectives that possibly challenges yours, and at least puts the question in your head, even if it doesn't switch your answer. So, one more. Hopefully this mic was awesome. And I'll see you on the other side of this break. So, this is the final part of the podcast, and I want to congratulate myself because, honestly, this has been a journey for this episode. This episode, more than any episode, was the hardest one so far. But for 2021, I'm going to try to push myself to, instead of doing once a month, to do twice a month. And to just make it a part of my everyday thing. There's some times where, like, honestly, I have thoughts in my head about certain things. And I think this platform has been such a cool space to express it. And to do so in a constructive manner. So, this whole episode has been about empowerment. And, we talked about ways to get empowered, whether it be in your local community, whether it be in your place of employment for, yourself as a worker. And honestly, maybe I can come back and say as yourself as a manager, because when you're moving into those managerial positions, there's a certain competency level to actually be a good manager, which ironically I'm read because I'm becoming a program director. And so I'm reading a lot as I prepare to sort of have people look up at me on a consistent basis and say, hey, what's the answer? So, I think there's a lot to this subject of feeling like you can get involved in a big community and doing something, no matter how disheartening things are. And tell me, and trust me, things can be really disheartening. I saw some news clippings in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement that was disheartening, where I guess in Detroit they were trying to label those protests as civil conspiracy after the protests were met with extreme brutality, which is wrong and racist. And another example of brutality happening in Jacksonville, Florida, where the young lady was brutalized just for wanting cops to move off her property. So, and so much more. And this is, not that podcast, not a news or politics podcast, although I'm not afraid to talk about those things, because those things are part of cultural competency, and we don't need a special moment to be active and vigilant about instances of racism and doing what we can to combat them. But just as that or news is, or it could be like if you're in some place of employment and you don't see the changes that you want to see, all that can be disheartening. But if no one ever tries and takes that chance, then nothing ever changes. And the chant, and from you asserting yourself, even in failure, you learn so much about who you are as a person and who the people you're advocating for, the community, whether they support you, whether they don't support you, whether they are people that will understand one way or another. And I've seen it happen so many times where people just have the right motivation to try and find themselves doing amazing things. I had a patient that was that had difficulty with her mental health and to the point where it destabilized so many things. And she had like a hobby, and she was so motivated that she became an integral part of organization as a volunteer, and then almost got paid to be a part of that organization based on her willingness to try. And as I said before, it can be daunting, especially when you're the only person doing it, and I've been there. To talk more about my sort of transition into being a program director and everything that I went through with that. I'm transitioning to a new position, but I was considered to be sort of an outside contender for program director at my current place of employment. And one thing came up where one of the people they asked as a reference for me handling that position, had some, negative feedback. And it came from an instance where, I was working with this supervisor, and we're trying to get in some agreement of a form, and the directions, I was given was not consistent, and it's difficult, because you have your supervisor there, you have, your you're talking about your past supervisor, you're talking about, prescribers that hold some type of administrative position over you, and I'm even talking to the number 2 or 3 or 4 person in the entire program. So there's a lot of pressure to just, comply. And I was asked a question, if you were to redo that whole situation, where it led to some people people saying that you were, defensive, would you do something different? And I honestly said no. And it was. So we have an edit point. This is going to sound a little weird, but I got a call during the podcast. And so, yeah. But hey, we're a young podcast. And calling, that's going to be something else that I'm going to have to do. And one day I actually do want to have people call in. I want to figure out a way to record this as I'm talking to someone on the phone, because I don't know, I'm not the biggest fan of guests on podcasts. It takes away from the personality, and I'm just interviewing the person. But still, I kind of like the idea. But, yeah. So where was I? I was talking essentially that there's been a lot of measures that were thought unthinkable, crazy, just you'll never get that done the first time. And it failed. But the lessons learned, the conversation, bringing some things to the public attention, that was part of the reason why some of these measures eventually were picked up. And so, I urge people to get involved in whatever way they feel comfortable with. And it could be tiny. It doesn't have to be voting. It doesn't have to be anything like that. It just has to be something that they feel comfortable in, and something that gives them control. It could be, exercising. It could be choosing their diet. And it could be choosing their friends. It could be valuing their time in terms of, having boundaries with their manager when they have their lunch break. It doesn't have to be as big as passing a bill or anything like that, but it's something in your life that you take control back of. It could be learning all the specialists that are in your health facility and all the resources, and how to take advantage of those things, so therefore you can be more independent and not have to, depend on people, or to feel that you can do more for yourself. All those things are things that help to make people feel less helpless. Because especially, in this society, especially for a lot of sub-populations, I've heard that, admitting weakness, admitting that you need help is almost unthinkable. I remember I used to run a chronic pain group, and it was about people just processing about the struggles of their pain. And, and it got to a point where the group was all men. And to a man, none of them would ever felt total discomfort of admitting weakness, of admitting vulnerability, that they needed help. And that's knowing that sometimes the consequences of not doing so was dire. And they still would, because it's been put in our society, I think across the board, but other populations, subpopulations, whether it be, men or even, you could say, to a lesser extent, people of color, as they are, problems and the oppression that we sort of face are sort of dismissed, and everything is sort of placed on us as if it's our fault and not the failings of our environments around us. We've been sort of socialized into that, where we really tend to sort of beat up on ourselves a little bit and not say, you know what, I didn't have control of this, or I didn't have control of that. But when you look towards strategies to sort of empower yourself, it's a way to sort of fight back. And I know that even from that group, ironically, as the men, would say, hey, I'm not in favor of doing X, Y, Z, they would learn a couple of things. They would learn to do one thing or another from their colleagues, from their group mates, and those one or two skills would be helpful in terms of processing and in terms of overcoming challenges going forward. And so, I really hope that, whenever people listen to podcasts, whenever it gets popular, that you take that empowerment sense to heart, and honestly, and even if you don't know, you can ask, because a lot of the things I know now and how things that I've learned, I didn't know, natively. I just asked, and someone was willing to tell me. And I know that, unfortunately, there are some people that are, I'd say, not as forthcoming or not as nice. But there's some people who are. And I've met people along the way that have shared information, with me, for free, that has just been kind and been sort of mentors. So there's people willing to help. There's people out there looking for people that are willing to do certain things, because I think part of empowerment is that it sort of meets another life goal, which is sort of teaching. You get to a point where you're sort of, if we're following sort of Erickson's the stage of development sort of loosely, where you kind of gain some stability from a financial standpoint, and after you get to that point of stability, it's more about building other people up. It's more about giving back to the community. And I think, I even mentioned that that's part of the first part of empowerment. And so there's other people on that other side who feel like they're comfortable in their space, and it's less about continually just building up when they sort of already met that threshold of feeling comfortable and having stability, and more about actually doing something that impacts the world on a bigger level. And I feel that, because of those people out there, there's so many people that if you're willing to work, if you're willing to, you know, maintain a positive pro-social relationship with them, they'll be willing to teach. They'll be willing to actually do things. So venture out into the world and just be a part of it and try to make the world a little better place. I implore you, and I think this study sort of proves that. This is this episode of the LCSW, the podcast. It's the last one for 2020. So until 2021, breathe easy. Thank you.